I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next set of speakers. From InterVision, we have Adam Scamihorn. Adam is the Resiliency Product Director. He's been with InterVision for 11 years. He's a successful technology and service leader with over 20 years experience in cloud and resilience. Adam's always looking for opportunities to help organizations protect their data centers and accelerate cloud adoption. Then from Arctic Wolf, we have Scott Holewinski. Scott is the founder of the incident response firm Tetra Defense that was acquired by Arctic Wolf in February of last year. Scott is currently the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Arctic Wolf's incident response organization. And we have Bob Skelley. Bob joined Arctic Wolf 2.5 years ago to build out the global channel organization and now serves as VP Channel Strategy and Development. So with that, they're going to talk about what can you afford to lose, the importance of having an incident response plan. Adam, I'll toss to you, my friend.
Thank you for that introduction, Jeff. As he said, I am Adam Scamihorn. I'm joined by Scott and Bob from Arctic Wolf. I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about bad things are happening. There's a lot of data out there, a lot of statistics, and sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, but this is the type of screen we want to start the conversation with where a system has been ransomed. This can completely change your day, your business, your month, your year, and how things are going. And today we want to talk a little bit and provide some insights and guidance to help you prepare for what many are calling an inevitable cyber attack. I'm going to walk through an introduction here, talk a little bit about just a high-level overview of what we're doing today. And then I'm going to toss it over to Scott and Bob from Arctic Wolf and let them talk about the current threat landscape, as well as some cyber insurance updates. And then I'll take it back from them, talk a little bit about InterVision's approach, and then close us up. So back to this slide, to be clear, when something bad like this happens, it's not a technology problem. This is a business issue. This often results in downtime concerns over loss of important data, things like PII, PCI, and PHI, which have long tentacles into privacy and legal concerns. The cost to a business can be incredibly impactful, not only financially, but to their reputation as well. Last year, InterVision built a product called Ransomware Protection as a Service, or RPAS. And we did this from about a decade of experience, both from the incident response side of the business and the disaster recovery side of the business. And we looked at all of the incidents we'd done and the increase, especially over the last 5 years, of cyber attack threats. And we said, hey, what are the gaps that most organizations need help filling that would have made the biggest difference in the face of their incidents? And so we took the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, cybersecurity framework, and we laid out the gaps in controls, and then we laid out our services and solutions and experience where we could help people build a foundation to prevent, but also to react. And what those essentially are made up of, the first kind of row you see here on this slide is what we call SOC as a service, Security Operations Center as a service, which contains endpoint detection and response and managed detection and response. This is all the early alerting. This is where Arctic Wolf is a big partner in our ability to fulfill this, as well as 24/7 access to people and processes to both be preventative, but also to be able to detect and respond when those bad things happen. And then from the ability to actually do something about that after something is detected, to respond and recover, we combined a lot of our experience around disaster recovery and backups to build immutable, ransomware hardened recovery solutions that we call ransomware recovery as a service. And that allows us to then take the data from the SOC side and threat hunt for it in a disaster recovery landing zone, secure it, and rebuild an organization very, very quickly as we respond to actual incidents. The third row that we put in was the VCSO. We believe that every organization can benefit from additional security posture and advice because we handle so many of these incidents. Having ongoing advisory and assistance to both support the maturation of the security posture, but also to be there when and if something happens, to be an incident response coordinator for this team. And so that was a wildly successful way to build a foundation to help protect against ransomware and other cyber attacks. We didn't want to stop there. Looking into 2023 and beyond, we want to continue to build solutions and meet our customers where they are at. And we understand everyone's kind of got their own different level of maturity as well as their own gaps. And so as we build those things out, we want to look at the current security landscape and the requirements, both from a security compliance posture, but also a cyber liability insurance. And so with all of that in mind, I'm going to hand it off to Arctic Wolf and let them dive a little bit deeper into these specific bullets and talk about what we know about the security landscape and what's happening with cyber insurance data today.
Thanks, everybody, and appreciate it. Joining me today, as we heard at the introduction, is Scott Holewinski, and Scott was the founder of Tetra Defense, which is now our incident response organization here at Arctic Wolf. And Scott and I just wanted to chat about a few things. And Scott, really, it starts off with the threat landscape, right? And I mean, we've spent a lot of time gathering information and content and trends from the cases that we supported last year, and several weeks ago we actually introduced our threat landscape report, and just some opening thoughts on that and what we're seeing in the landscape today, and some of the observations you have around the threat landscape.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. Thanks for the introduction, Adam. Yeah, I think just to set the stage, kind of where our data comes from, I think it's important to understand. So Arctic Wolf Incident Response will respond to about 1,000 cyber attacks in any given year, which means our team is kind of seeing all the bad stuff that's going on out there. And I think, Adam, you touched on it. When we get engaged as an incident response firm, I like to say, the business isn't just having a not great day. They're having a horrible day, potentially leading to a horrible month or even year. So, the companies that we're helping respond are in a really, really tough spot. And something that our team takes very seriously is not just getting those organizations back up and running, but understanding truly what the root point of compromise was. What was kind of the initial event that happened that allowed those threat actors into their systems. And we take that information that we collect on every single case throughout the year, and we compile that into an annual threat report. We also produce one on a quarterly basis as well. And it's really our opportunity to share our findings with our partners and their end users to hopefully prevent these attacks in the first place. So, that's kind of where this conversation starts. So our threat intel report is the basis for some of the stuff that we're going to share, but it's important to know it's based on 1,000+ cases that really give us our insights that we can now share with all of you.
Yeah, and specifically, one of the data points really demonstrates the breadth of the attacks, right? The size of the customer, the geographies, industries. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, this is a great slide. So I love sharing this slide simply because it shows a couple important things that I like to highlight. One is that, this is just looking at North America. And what you'll see is we responded to attacks in all regions. So, threat actors at the end of the day are opportunistic. They take advantage of lowest hanging fruit. And typically from threat actor group to threat actor group, they have a specific tactic that they're leveraging at any given point in time. So it might be one quarter that one threat actor group is really focused on, a vulnerability that might be a piece of software that a lot of manufacturers use, for example. So we might see an uptick in manufacturers getting hit, not necessarily because they're focused on manufacturers, but because they have a vulnerability that they're leveraging that just so happens to be used by manufacturers. So threat actors don't have it out for a particular segment or vertical. They're typically just looking. They're lazy. They're looking for the easy way in, and they'll take advantage of that. So we see all sectors hit. We also see all company sizes. Again, they're opportunistic, so they're not just focused on Fortune 100 or 500 or just small businesses. They're looking for easy targets, and that could be a massive healthcare system or school system, or it could be a small 20-person law firm. If they can extort money, or somehow take advantage of the data they get through carrying out one of these attacks, they'll do it. So again, key takeaway is everybody can be a target, and threat actors at the end of the day are just looking for easy opportunities.
Yeah, and then as you drill down another level deeper,
Yep.
and we start to talk about the industries, tell me a little bit about what we saw and what trends we really picked up on last year.
Yeah, so I think the calendar year 2022, now into 2023, a lot of common themes that we've seen year after year. Healthcare continues to be, by and large, our most impacted, segment. But it is interesting if you look at it from a quarter to quarter perspective. If you're looking at that healthcare line, you'll see that in Q1 7%, but it's actually trailing off a little bit. And what we've actually seen as 2022 progressed is education and manufacturing started to actually pick up. So you'll see in the last quarter of FY20 or of 2022, those two segments were our largest number of incidents that we responded to. And again, it comes back to what I was talking about on the previous slide. We oftentimes see education and manufacturing, sometimes their budgets and the money that they're spending on building their security defenses maybe aren't quite there. So we see just some opportunities for threat actors to take advantage of that. So we are seeing those two sectors in particular start to invest more. But I think we've seen finance and healthcare in particular are maybe just a little ahead of the curve. They've been investing in, improving their security posture, maybe a little ahead of some of these other segments. So, if next week a new vulnerability comes out that impacts healthcare systems, we could see a spike in that line. But I think more broadly, we're seeing, healthcare finance maybe trend down a little bit, and we're starting to see threat actors focusing a little bit more in education and manufacturing, as the end of 2022. And I can tell you we have a new threat intel report coming out next week. We're seeing that trend continue in manufacturing and in education.
Yeah, it's an ever evolving landscape here, and we're constantly adjusting to, the new threat vectors as well as, industries that might be more in focus on any given day and week, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So root point of compromise, big part of what we really want to try and identify. It's important because it helps us understand what we have to do in that particular security environment to prevent future attacks. Can you talk a little bit more to root point of compromise and what we do there?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, it's a really important piece of the work that our team does. When a company gets hit by a cyber attack, if you don't truly understand what that root point of compromise was, and we see this a lot of times when folks will kind of do an internal investigation and think they found it, and what can happen is reinfection. So if we don't go all the way back to how they actually started their attack, you might not have closed the door that they got in through. So our team digs really hard to make sure that we've identified that true root point of compromise. And we take that and kind of compile it into some of the data that we're looking at here. And what's pretty clear when you look at this particular pie chart is that, external exposures, you hear a lot about end user or user actions leading to these attacks, the classic, oh, they clicked on a bad link. We certainly see those types of actions leading to, catastrophic cyber incidents. But by and large, when you look at 2022, and if you looked at 2021 and 2020, what we see time and time again is that an externally facing vulnerability is what is leading to the vast majority of the incidents that we respond to. So these are unpatched systems. In many cases, these are patches that have been available for a year or more, and customers simply haven't gotten around to, applying those patches. So it's something that crushes our team when they see that there was a way of preventing this attack, and the customer simply didn't take action soon enough. So key takeaway here is having a good vulnerability management program in place to make sure your critical systems are always up to date. This is your firewalls, any of your remote access, all of the very basic things oftentimes are the things that we see organizations fall down on. On the user action side, it's not a small piece of the pie. Still more than a quarter of the attacks we respond to would fall into what we call a user action. That was the root point of compromise. No surprise, email phishing is one of the primary tactics being used by threat actors in the user action kind of section.
Yeah, so a lot of good information there, and we're always learning. And Scott, I know that we also leverage Arctic Wolf Labs and some of the insights we get through our own platform, and it's a combination of all of that intelligence and the intelligence we gain from helping customers out through incident response that really informs all this. So really appreciate you sharing all that data. To shift gears a little bit, because the insurance carrier and the broker industry and cyber insurance, big topic. Everybody wants to understand what's going on there. And I know you spend a ton of time talking to insurance carriers, talking to brokers, understanding what challenges they're facing on an ongoing basis. What are they trying to do to properly insure an organization? So just kind of pivoting to that topic, to start, what's really changed in the cyber insurance space over the last few years?
Yeah, so just for a little context, we partner very closely with the cyber insurance ecosystem. So Arctic Wolf Incident Response is officially partnered with about 34 different insurance carriers just here in North America alone. And how those relationships work is, in a lot of situations, those insurance carriers will bring us their clients who have been impacted by a major cyber incident and engage us to assist their insureds through that incident. So, in a lot of cases, the insurance carriers are pulling us in to help their insureds. So we partner very closely with that insurance ecosystem, and not just on the claim side, so responding to an active incident, but also on the underwriting side. So, the carriers are coming to us saying, what should we be looking for when we're looking at underwriting a new cyber insurance customer? So it's a really close relationship we have, and the transition that we have seen happen within the cyber insurance space is, 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, getting cyber insurance was relatively easy and pretty inexpensive. You could get a pretty large limit and not pay a whole lot for it. And we saw cyber insurance taking on a lot of risk. Their underwriting bar was very low. And as a result, there were significant losses in a lot of cyber insurance lines for major carriers. So fast forward, a couple years, starting in kind of 2020, we saw underwriting criteria start to really tighten up. And what that meant is that, it was harder to get cyber insurance. If you qualified, the limits were lower, the premiums were higher. So we saw a pretty significant shift. In insurance speak, they say that it went from a soft market to a hard market, meaning it just became much more difficult to get cyber insurance, and when you could, it just got pretty expensive. And a lot of that just has to do with the basic economics of insurance. They are in the business of making money, just like every other business, and they simply had to balance out the risk they were taking on and accepting versus pushing back a little bit more on those insured, saying, no, you need to address some of these risks before you become a risk we're willing to take. And that's the shift that we've seen. So premiums have gone up, in some cases triple or even quadruple what they were just a couple years ago, and limits have come down, meaning where you maybe before you could have gotten $2 or $3 or $4 million of coverage, you might only now get $1 million. So we've seen a pretty major shift, year over year in just the last couple of years.
Yeah, and so they really had to, right? As you described, they weren't balancing their risk exposure properly.
Yep.
And so they've really spent a lot of time the last couple of years learning and understanding cybersecurity and understanding what creates a lower risk profile for a client. And so as we think about risk and what insurers are looking at in particular, what are the top priorities that they're talking about, and how are they stack ranking these risk mitigation steps in terms of importance?
Yeah. So cyber insurance, it's important to understand, is still a very new line of insurance. It is quite immature when you stack it up against more traditional lines like property and casualty and things like that that have been around for a century plus some years. So there's a ton of data supporting those models that the insurance carriers are using. Cyber insurance is brand new. It's still for many carriers, it's less than a decade that they've been offering these policies. So they're still trying to figure out what their models are. But what we kind of put together on this slide, these are like the non-negotiable items. When you look at even being able, these are binary. Like if you don't do these things, you're just not going to be able to get a policy. Now, a lot of carriers are reaching even beyond what you're seeing right now on the screen, but you have to at least be doing these basic things. So starting kind of on the left here, MFA, multi-factor authentication on kind of business critical systems is non-negotiable at this point. So, you need to make sure that, MFA is enabled on, admin accounts and servers and, your cloud accounts. If you don't have an MFA program in place, carriers are simply not going to be willing to take on you as a risk. And then, kind of the second one is we're seeing carriers start to really ask, okay, you have certain solutions in place, whether it's an endpoint product or, firewalls that are doing logging or VPNs, but is anybody looking at them? It is alarming how many incidents come into our incident response team where they've spent plenty on solutions and alarms were going off and simply nobody was monitoring and responding to those alerts. So you were starting to see insurance carriers ask more and more about, what does your internal security team look like? Do you have 24/7 monitoring of those systems? No surprise, most of these attacks happen over the weekend, when folks aren't in the office. So do you have somebody who's looking at these tools and monitoring these tools? I already talked about vulnerability management. The bulk of our incidents start with some type of externally facing vulnerability. So insurance carriers are increasingly asking, what is your patch management system look like? Is there a formal approach to how you are kind of monitoring, when you might have a vulnerability? And then as important, is there a team of folks who are actually implementing patches? And then finally, this is really basic and it's something that our team is really passionate about. But incident response planning, do you have a plan in place to identify when you've had a major incident, and when you do, that you can immediately put to work in helping reduce really the impact of an incident. And something that's important to keep in mind when an insurance carrier is looking at, potentially taking on a new insured, they're looking at the total exposure they're taking on. And in a lot of cases, it's not just the cyber insurance policy, but it also is something called business interruption coverage. So, the same insurance carrier is often on the hook for, costs associated with the response, but also business losses associated with the attack. And with attacks like ransomware in particular, those business interruption claims can be pretty expensive. And one way to reduce the cost of business interruption associated with an incident is having an effective plan. We have seen that when folks have an effective plan in place, it shaves days, if not weeks, off of our response effort. And that, in the insurance carrier's eyes, ties directly back to overall losses.
Yeah, so great segue really to drill down on the IR plan itself, and why we see this as such an important component and how it affects our ability as an incident response firm in terms of getting them back up to running, and what we're capturing, and how it speeds the remediation process up in general. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned already, this is near and dear to our team's heart. When we occasionally get a client who has done a really good job of putting an IR plan together, those cases simply go better. And it really starts kind of right from the initial call we have with the client, when they can, when they're executing on a plan and they've done some of the basic blocking and tackling in advance of being thrown into the fire. We're just able to get started faster and have a more effective response. So, we just kind of highlighted some of the things that are basic, but really important. First and foremost, identifying like the internal key stakeholders that are going to kind of be spearheading the response, and that's not just the technical folks, but also the business folks. Sometimes these are business decisions when it involves ransomware and whether or not we need to pay a ransom. Having the conversation in advance of the incident about, are we okay paying a ransom? Is this something that ethically, morally, we're okay with if found in that position? These are things that are important to have a conversation around in advance of the incident. So, who are your internal key stakeholders, and then your external? Do you have outsourced IT help and support, and who are the primary contacts that we're going to be working with there? So really important to identify that in advance of the incident. From there, we talk a lot about critical business systems, and this is a really interesting one. If you go to each functional group inside of an organization, of course, their system is the most important one. But if you take a step back and say, all right, in the context of the entire business, what are our business critical systems? And let's make sure we stack rank those. That's really valuable to do, again, not in the heat of the moment, but in advance of an attack. And you might be surprised what comes out of that. You talk to the finance team and they are, of course, going to say that their accounting system is the most important. But if it's a manufacturing facility, the ability to run the presses is the most important part, right? So getting those business critical systems identified and then stack ranked is important, because that will help our team understand what is the order in which we need to help bring these systems back online. And that's a really important piece of information for us to have. Understanding how to file a claim. If you have cyber insurance, who's your insurance broker? What's your policy number? Having all of that identified in advance will help get that process started very, very quickly. And then we're obviously a little biased, but having an established relationship with an IR firm in advance of an incident is also really, really valuable. It allows us to kind of understand who those internal key stakeholders are that we'll be working with. There's opportunities in partnership with folks like InterVision to do IR planning and tabletops and things like that. Again, just building that muscle around how we're going to respond to an incident is all part of an IR plan.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I love the way we've structured some of our approach to this, because we do enable our partner InterVision to build complementary services around this and really deliver a higher value overall proposition to their customers so that we can really dial in on the needs of each specific customer and their security needs. So I'm going to wrap up a little bit here. So before we turn it over to the InterVision team, some call to action and next steps. First of all, we have a threat landscape report. We're going to get the link to the InterVision team so that they can share it with the audience, and you can get the full details of some of the information that Scott shared today. Reach out to your InterVision team. We want you to learn more about the importance of incident response planning, how you could begin building your IR plan, and the InterVision team can really advise you in that area and guide you through the process and what tools and resources are available to you. And find an incident response partner that's going to provide a really fast SLA, some economic benefits, and this IR planning tool. Those are the minimums you should be looking for in any incident response provider. Scott, anything else to add in terms of final call to action before we turn it over to Adam?
No, I think we covered all of them. I think you mentioned kind of the IR planning tool. One thing that's interesting with our offer through InterVision, we have an IR planning tool that's actually a web-based tool, which is really handy. Oftentimes when folks have an IR plan, it's not easily accessible in the heat of the moment. So having a tool or a plan that's accessible from anywhere, like our IR planning tool is, can just be really, really valuable. So just something to keep in mind.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for joining me today. And Adam, back to you.
So as stated earlier, the threat landscape is very real. Got to see some pretty good details there. One of the things we know is that people want what I would call a bat phone. They want a hero, someone to call when something like this happens. When something bad happens, they need to know exactly who to call. And so incident response retainers were kind of born out of that desire. But traditional incident response retainers have some pretty big downsides. First and foremost, they're expensive. Most retainers on the market today require a large block of incident response hours to be purchased up front, and these can cost tens of thousands of dollars. In addition to that, you have to usually burn those hours in a set amount of time. So organizations may not have a use for them, and they may have a way to use them, or they may not. So they've had to invest the money, and they've got to rush to burn them before the year's up. In addition to that, it doesn't come with any of the planning assistance that Scott and Bob were talking about, unless you're paying additional or using those hours specifically to do some of that planning. And so we wanted to take a very different approach, keep what's good about incident response, having someone to call, but also kind of learn from what's needed and do a little bit better. And so we've been learning from our customers and Arctic Wolf's customers about what they value the most in incident response retainers. And you might be surprised, but it's not the opportunity to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a block of hours that they may never need. The top finding, the most important thing you need to know is that organizations want to get help quickly. And so they want to know where it's going to come from, how much it's going to cost, and they want to have some kind of a guarantee around that, a service level agreement. In addition to that, they want to know who it is. They want to make sure that the person they're going to talk to is an actual trusted advisor. And so they want the ability to meet that IR team and work with them. And so with Arctic Wolf, we have this, what we call the Incident Response Jumpstart Retainer. And it includes kind of these 5 high-level components you see across the screen. It has the planning and review piece that Scott was talking about, along with a 1-hour response time guarantee to request for incident response services. It has a complimentary incident scoping call. That means when an incident happens, that call is going to just happen before anything else is put together in scope immediately. And then there's going to be preferred pricing and case minimums along with that for when an incident or a bad thing happens. You're not buying any of those hours up front, but you do have locked in pricing so you know what it's going to cost. And finally, the cyber insurance approved IR team. Scott mentioned over 30 insurance organizations that they work with actively today. But wait, there is more. So we want to be a little bit more capable of stepping in and adding services, just like Bob was talking about. And so when we've partnered with Arctic Wolf for this Jumpstart retainer, we have 3 kind of proactive professional services that we layer on top in an a la carte model to be able to provide the best planning possible around your entire risk strategy. And those are a virtual CISO tabletop exercise to be able to make sure you understand your business's risks and how you would begin to respond. This can really help fill out that IR plan builder that's hosted on the website. I want to point out, when Scott was mentioning being able to access that anywhere from the web is incredibly important. You would be amazed how many organizations we work with who go into their incident response plan and it was on the machine that was attacked and they don't have access to it. And so their plan isn't at their fingertips. So we want to be prepared for that, and we want to have it at our fingertips. In addition to that, we want to make sure we have a resiliency maturity that makes sense. All the recovery components that are going to be needed when something bad happens. Our backups are immutable. We have another place to stand up in our DR environment when and if our environment becomes a crime scene. And so we put a maturity workshop around all of those resiliency components to help organizations understand where they're going to be successful and if they need help. And finally, we have a really robust penetration testing model to help understand where those vulnerabilities are and help with vulnerability management, both as a one-time penetration test with this package or continuous penetration testing through InterVision's PTAS. And so to go in a little bit more depth on each one of these services, I'm just going to share high level with incident response. You want to be able to do some actual penetration testing to safeguard the user data, show real-time risks that are happening, and follow compliance. A lot of the compliance and insurance requirements are starting to include penetration testing or continuous penetration testing as a minimum to both be insured or be compliant. We're going to maintain user trust, prioritize risk, provide incident response, gain business insights, and get security awareness. The resiliency maturity workshop is going to dive into your backup capabilities. And keep in mind, there's no such thing as a turnkey solution for backup and recovery, but this workshop is going to give you the ability to analyze everything you're doing today, test it out against real types of attacks and threats that your business faces, similar to a tabletop exercise, but from a very specific backup and resiliency perspective. And then finally, the virtual CISO tabletop exercise, where we partner you with one of our cybersecurity experts to go through with the leadership of your business and evaluate scenarios against how your business would respond and help fill out that incident response and preparedness plan. In addition to those 3 components, which we have different ways of bundling and saving money on with that IR plan, InterVision's continually filling out a very sophisticated listing of cybersecurity services. We have basically the entire info security color wheel available to help organizations and meet them where they're at with their existing maturity. And so with whatever you're dealing with, wherever you're needing help around cybersecurity, we've got something to probably help plug that hole or help evolve that to the next level. And that is all I have. Thank you for attending today. Do we have any questions in the Q&A?
If you do have questions, be sure and type them in the Q&A section, the Q&A panel. One of the things that I was curious about for any one of the 3 of you, I know we did a couple of joint events last year with Arctic Wolf, and one of the things we talked about were the trends in some of the threats, and it was interesting to hear that threats actually decreased when the pandemic hit, because gosh, the threat actors were impacted by the pandemic as well, and then we're on the rise. What does 2023 landscape look like, and what's what are we looking at for 2024 and beyond as far as trends in the threats? Where are they coming from? What types of threats are they? What should we be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so 2022 is actually really interesting. We actually saw a pretty significant impact. So actually a decrease in attacks right in line with the Ukraine-Russia conflict kicking off. Some of the largest ransomware groups were disrupted by that conflict. Conti being the biggest one. So, in 2021, Conti was responsible for probably 50% of our incident response cases, and they were at the epicenter of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and were really just disrupted by it. So we saw a decrease kind of in 2022 for the first 3 quarters, and then we saw it pick back up as Conti kind of broke up and started coming back online. And now we've seen that increase continue. So through 2023, we've seen about a 2x increase over the first 2 quarters of 2023 compared to 2022. So we've seen a really steep resurgence, primarily in ransomware. The tactics are shifting a little bit. So a year and a half ago, ransomware was still very much about encrypting systems, and extorting money from victims in order to decrypt systems. We still do see encryption, but by and large, a lot of the ransomware groups are now shifting to extortion for data theft and the non-release of data publicly. So we've seen a shift of tactics. I would say some of it has to do with laziness again. It's easy to, it's actually quite hard and takes a lot of time to encrypt systems. It's way easier to just steal data and then hold it ransom and say, I'm going to release this and extort you for the money to not release it. So we've seen some tactics shift, but ransomware is definitely back on the rise over the first, quarter and a half, 2 quarters of this year.
That's scary that it's 2x because the number was huge to begin with. Right?
Yeah,
And to double that is incredible.
Yep, it's really been a pretty steep increase this year.
When you all work with customers and you start building out the incident response plan and you go through the tabletop exercise, either Adam, you may want to take a stab at this as well, but for any one of you, what's the most common, call it issue or problem that's identified in those tabletop exercises the first time through as companies are doing that?
So I'll jump in.
Yeah, I'll say, Adam, I'll let you take that one.
Okay, yeah, I'll jump in. I think one of the biggest things that we find very quickly is the assumption that communication has happened in an organization where one team thinks something is the other team's responsibility, or they've got something documented. You would be amazed how many times there's something in a policy that says, hey, we're going to go do X when Y happens, and then nobody knows how to do X. Or the person who actually did X hasn't been working at the company for 3 years. And so I wouldn't say it's one specific thing that everyone has to do, but what it is it's an assumption that communication has happened, or responsibility has been handled by someone else when communication hasn't happened. And often by getting the stakeholders in the same room and working together to say, hey, what would we do if, those assumptions come out real quickly, because they're going to start talking, okay, this is what I'm just going to say we're going to do. And the other person's be like, well, we can't do this because of this. And so you're going to start seeing those different assumptions get handled very, very quickly. And it's going to improve an organization's ability to document and plan.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It comes down to clear lines of ownership, and that's both internal and external. Oftentimes, what we will see is assumptions around who will own what, and there might be, hey, we use a third party for that, and that third party has never been brought into this planning conversation. And the customer who's now been impacted had an assumption that they would handle some certain things, and that vendor or that third party was not part of that conversation. And again, when an attack has happened, that is not the time you want to be sorting out who owns what. So yeah, doing that in advance as part of a tabletop, pull in those those critical third party vendors into that conversation is really important.
So you were talking earlier about cyber insurance, and I think that's been one of the interesting changes that we've seen over the last couple of years. Have you started to see where insurance companies will offer reduced premiums when companies have Arctic Wolf or InterVision with Arctic Wolf? Have we seen reductions in those premiums?
So we are just at the beginning of some of that starting to happen. So we actually have a new program we just launched with a partner where our Arctic Wolf customers do qualify for a pretty steep discount on a cyber insurance policy, but we're just starting to see insurance carriers go there. I've been surprised that it's been such a slow move. I look at, what the Arctic Wolf solution stack offers. If I was an insurance carrier, I would be banging down the door saying, I'll insure your customers all day long. They're just something to understand about the insurance industry is they do not move fast on anything.
Right.
It's a pretty old school industry. It's not disparaging it in any way. It's been around a long time and they just don't change quickly. So we do see more of the innovative insurtechs kind of leading the way here. And the incumbents, the more traditional insurance carriers will follow suit. So it's really now just starting to get figured out. And I think over the next couple years, you'll see more partnerships between firms like Arctic Wolf and the more traditional insurance carriers to extend discounts, or at the very least, like pre-qualification, so at least you are qualified. I mean, that's been, there was such a massive shift over the last year. It went from they would write a policy for anybody to they were saying no more often than yes. So we're kind of seeing it stabilize a little bit now, and I think we will see those types of alliances become more common here over the next couple of years.
So Adam, when you think about InterVision's customers, what industries have been most active in adopting an IR plan, an incident response plan?
Yeah, so we've worked with a lot of state and local governments that have adopted IR plans, a lot of manufacturing and healthcare. Obviously, you saw those numbers as higher on Arctic Wolf's report, so that all makes sense essentially. I do want to jump in too on the cyber insurance side of things. Scott was talking about the pre-qualification side of that. We've also seen insurance companies start to actually work with their organizations on threat feeds. InterVision's clients actually just this week were being contacted to make sure that patching was happening by their insurance carrier from specific 0 days that were released this year. So found that entertaining because on top of that, we're obviously monitoring those same threat feeds and helping with the management and patching. But now the cyber insurance carriers are monitoring it to a point where they are checking in to make sure that specific vulnerabilities are being patched.
Yeah, it's a good point, Adam. So most, I shouldn't say most, several of the large incumbent insurance carriers, so I won't mention specific names, but are starting to do external scans of their insureds. And yeah, they actually have internal teams that will reach out and say, hey, you have the XYZ vulnerability. And then oftentimes collaborating with like us, we'll provide data. Hey, we've seen 5 attacks this week on this particular vulnerability. Not all vulnerabilities are created equal. It takes having the vulnerability, and then it takes a threat actor group that's focusing in on that vulnerability. So when we tie those two things together, the carriers that we partner with, those 34 insurance carriers, reach out to us, we let them know, and they are, proactively kind of reaching out. So it's brand new. 12 months ago that wasn't happening, but again, they're trying to just shift to just being a little less risky in the risks they're accepting.
We got that. So gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate the informative session.